So when it comes to the return of serve, a lot of players, especially if they're at the novice level, don't take into account the geometry of the court. And what I mean by that is they make a mistake in their positioning because of it. They are of the belief that the ball will always travel straight, which is absolutely not true in the game of tennis. In the case of the serve, a lot of beginner tennis players and some intermediates will position themselves in the middle between the singles line and the middle of the court, thinking this is the best positioning for the return of serve. So this makes sense, but what you have to understand is that when you're returning serve, from the returner's perspective, the server is going to be serving with a rightward trajectory. So for that reason, if the server is able to get an angle where the ball bounces somewhere around here, that ball will steeply exit the court this way. So for that reason, we have to position ourselves closer to the singles line in order to cover a ball like that. I see a lot of players are worried about leaving the middle of the court open, but you don't have to worry because the server will not be able to make the ball sharply curve towards the right unless we're talking about an incredible slice serve, which is very rare. Most of the time, the ball will go straight through the court, and therefore we have a legitimate chance to cover a ball that's going through the tee. So for that reason, you can leave the middle open, and you absolutely have to protect the rightward trajectory of the serve by standing closer to the singles line. Now, there are going to be times, for example, when you're playing a lefty as a right-hander, where you might even want to be a little bit closer towards the doubles line if someone is really able to get that sharp angle. There is never going to be a circumstance where you want to leave that side open. That makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. The most common mistake that I see at the recreational level is the following. Players prefer to hit a forehand. So for that reason, they position themselves closer towards the middle looking for a forehand return. And if their opponent is able to hit a decent serve out wide, they're never going to be able to cover that ball. Why? Because again, the ball is going to have a rightward trajectory. So even if you have a poor backhand and you're looking to hit a forehand return, you still, even on the do side, want to position yourself close to the singles line in order to cover that trajectory on a wide serve. You can leave the middle of the court open because unless we're talking about an insane kick serve that you almost never see, the ball will usually either go straight through the court or will actually maintain its rightward trajectory, and you have a legitimate chance to cover a ball that's coming straight through the tee. Now, the geometry of the court is seldomly taken into consideration on the serve unless someone is trying to demonstrate a kick serve for the camera. This is very common, where you'll see somebody record themselves and they're staying way over here and they kick the ball, and now it appears as if the kick serve is exiting the court very steeply. Now, the reason why this is happening is not because the person that you're watching has an amazing kick serve, but more for the reason that the trajectory is going to increase the further away from the middle we stand. And now you're probably asking yourself, Nick, why don't players use this tactic? Why don't they stand further away from the middle and get that super sharp trajectory and have the ability to exit the ball sharply towards the outside? Now, I'm going to tell you that this is a tactic that used to be far more common on the ATP Tour, especially on clay. I don't see it as often anymore. And the reason why it was used on clay and not so much on hard court is, number one, players had more time on clay. The surface is slower, so in case they don't hit their serve accurately enough, there would be a danger that they get a down the line back and return or a forehand down the line for a lefty into the open court with very little chance to cover that ball. This is going to be less of a danger on clay compared to faster surfaces like grass and hard. And also, clay court specialists back in the day used to look for a forehand as their first ball in the rally. So they would kick the ball out wide, and now it would be very easy for them to start dominating the point with their forehand. Now, the reason why you don't see players stand far away from the middle anymore is that the speed of the professional game has increased tremendously. The ground strokes have gotten faster, and so has the return. So it is a big danger to serve from here because you are exposing a big chunk of the court. Now, how about the lower levels? Is this a good tactic to employ? Absolutely yes. And I use this tactic still to this day. I like tricking my opponent by standing here. The opponent will think that I'm going to serve out wide, but what I like to do sometimes is fake the serve and go down the tee. A lot of times the opponent will kind of be leaning towards the back end because they think I'm looking for that angle, and I'm going to get a cheap ace through the tee that way. And generally, it's always a good thing to mix things up on the serve. So maybe once in your service game, you slide over here and give the opponent a different look. This could be a disturbance to the returner and can get you some free points. Now, how about doing it from the deuce side, standing further away from the middle? This is something that you never see on the Pro Tour, and I'm going to tell you why. It makes sense because it's going to be much easier to get a slice to curve off the court. But you have to remember that when a right-hander plays against a right-hander, this ball is going into the forehand, and the court that's open is the backhand side. And for that reason, I do not recommend it even at the recreational level, because if you don't hit your serve accurately enough, you're in big danger, and the opponent will have an easy forehand return with the entire court wide open. So in other words, when you're stepping away from the middle on your serve, only do it on the ad side. Now, how about the geometry of the court during baseline rallies? Now, one thing that you have to keep in mind is that when you're standing close to the middle, angles are more difficult to achieve. And why is that the case? Because you have less court to play into. For that reason, the target is a lot smaller. Now, when you get closer to the singles line, your angles are going to be much easier because, first of all, the target is going to be much greater. You're going to have more court to play into. But also, when we're talking about the trajectory of the ball will exit the court more sharply. So this has to do with the geometry of the court and the position at which we're striking the ball from. So take a look at how this ball exits the court. You can see that it's almost hitting the fence off of one bounce. So let me try to hit that same angle from closer to the middle. You can see while I do achieve that angle, the ball doesn't have quite the same trajectory. So what this means is that you should attempt angles when you are standing closer to the singles line, because not only are the angles going to be easier, but they're going to be far more effective, and you're going to make less mistakes off of them. If you attempt angles from closer to the middle, they're going to be far more difficult to execute, and you're going to hit a lot more balls wide. Now, of course, this applies both to the forehand and the backhand side. I will say though that if you have a one-handed backhand, this is one of the trickiest balls to hit with a one-hander. I'm going to do a full-length lesson on how to hit a one-handed angle backhand. The two-handed angle backhand is far more easier to achieve compared to the one-hander. So what that means is that it's probably going to be easier to hit an angle off the forehand compared to your one-handed backhand. If someone has a two-handed backhand, it doesn't matter whether you do an angle off the forehand side or off the backhand side. Now, you will have to practice this shot in a non-match situation. Don't ignore this shot and then come on a match court and start to attempt angles. You're not going to make them. So if you're going to use them in a match, make sure you practice them in a non-match situation. In some of my previous videos, I talk about high percentage tennis, and one of the components of high percentage tennis is to hit more of the balls cross court versus down the line, because down the line is a smaller target. If you hit the ball wrong, the ball will go out, while when you go cross court, you can miss-hit the ball slightly, the ball might still go in. But I'm going to give you one example where this does not apply, and this has to do with the geometry of the tennis court. So let's say you're hitting a forehand from outside the doubles alley. Now, high percentage tennis would teach you that cross court is better than down the line. But what you have to understand is that when you're standing here and you're aiming towards the right singles line, this is not down the line anymore. This is a cross-court shot. In other words, it's a diagonal shot. So when I attempt to hit the ball down the line here, I'm actually hitting cross-court, and this indeed is a more high percentage shot. So when you find yourself outside the doubles alley, don't be afraid to go down the line, because you're actually going cross-court. Now, when it comes to your volleys and your overheads, you absolutely must utilize angles and try to get the ball to curve off the court. One of the greatest volleyers of all time, Rafael Nadal, executes this tactic on almost every volley. He very seldomly tries to go long on his volleys. He always uses his angles to his advantage. This is a more high percentage shot for the simple reason that the volley does not have to be hit so hard. Again, I'm going to make a full-length video on how to hit an angle volley. And when it comes to the overhead, even here, a lot of players try to go hard through the court and they don't utilize angles. If you hit the ball with a sharp enough angle, the ball will exit the court at a very steep trajectory, and the overhead does not have to be struck so hard, and you're going to make less overhead mistakes as a result of it. And guys, when it comes to the geometry of the tennis court, not only are you going to utilize angles, and you're going to be cognizant of where you're standing on the court, because this will influence the angle at which the ball is going to come off your racket. You also have to utilize the height And make sure that you're thinking about whether you're hitting the ball low over the net or you're hitting it high over the net. You have to utilize the geometry of the tennis court and all its elements to your advantage to help you win more tennis matches.